Hello and welcome to Rainbow History Class, the queer and trans history that you probably don't get in school. My name is Rudy Jean Rigg.
My name is Hannah and it's great to be here.
You say that every time.
I know, because it's really hard to roll on with something useful after, because you got to do the whole long bit and then say your name, whereas I just have to say I'm Hannah. Like, it just feels like I need to say something.
Well,
but I've got nothing to say.
Oh, you really?
Yeah, that's a chronic problem with me. Nothing to say.
I feel like you could come in hot with like a fun fact or like, I don't know.
No, the entire episode I have prepped is a fun fact.
Okay, well.
Maybe we just get straight into that.
Well, that's all right, because I think what we can do first up this week is, dear listener, I am speaking directly to you in this very moment. If you're listening to us on Spotify, do you want to just like chuck us a really quick follow? Because as it turns out, that is one of the most powerful things that a listener can do to help a podcast survive. Also, it helps, to get us out there onto other people's homepages and stuff.
Even if you know that our episodes come out every Tuesday, Australian time, even if you know that, if you hit follow, that is so much more valuable to helping a podcast succeed than even if you know when it comes out, just like looking it up in the search section every week.
Okay, you're so right, because what I love about the follow button, because I was never a fan. I'm never a fan of the follow button. But then I started to use it because I realized what it did was it like brought up the tile for the podcast on my like Spotify homepage, which you like you said, like you're like, oh, why do I need to do that if I know it comes out every Tuesday or whatever? But it's like, it makes it so much easier, and it makes sure that I don't forget to like listen to my like favorite podcast, because I enjoy like driving to work on a Monday, listening to like, my brother and me or whatever. And it just makes it more accessible, because like I'm low on time. I don't actually have time to search my brother and me.
Especially if it's a long podcast name like Rainbow History Class. Boring.
It is pretty boring.
Yeah.
No,
yeah.
Actually, I like the R letter is probably one of my favorite letters. And I'm biased, but I do like it.
All right,
as
Rudy
a standout.
Rigg.
Yeah. It's a standout letter to me, okay? But yeah, so chuck us a follow if you're on Apple's podcast. I don't know what they do over there, but I assume they have a similar function. But that's all the plugging we're going to do for the show. I just want to get it out the way up front this time, spice it up a little. But I think we should crack into it.
Totally. Okay, so I have an episode that I am really excited to do this week, because it's on a topic that I've been wrestling with for quite some time, and it's kind of come from like a lot of academia, so it does take a bit of time to kind of, get amongst it, steal my friend's university library passwords again so that I can access the academia, and then of course go through it and try and make that a little bit more accessible or easy to understand within the form of an entertaining podcast. But the reason that I brought it up this week is because, Rue, I'm having a hard time.
Wait, hang on. Hold on. I want to get into why you're having a hard time, but what are we even talking about?
I'm going to tell you.
Oh, okay. So this is an intentional preamble.
Yeah, this is an intentional preamble.
I was like, Hannah, I think you forgot to tell us what you were talking about. I think you just jumped straight into the trauma.
No, the fact that I'm having a hard time is related to this episode.
Okay, all right.
So it's important for me to kind of let you know how I came to this episode, rather than just picking like a dense topic to unpack with you today.
Okay, I thought we were having an emergency therapy session, and I was about to. Yeah.
I would have given you a bigger update before mic's on if this was not somehow related to what we were talking about.
Okay, go on, carry on.
So I'm having a hard time.
Sorry.
If you two are having a hard time, I'm here with you, okay? So last Tuesday, two of my last good friends that do not have children and live in Melbourne told me that they are moving countries.
Oh no.
So this was one of those things where they were like, we've got something to tell you. And I was like, sometimes I practice in the mirror my face when people tell me that, they're like having a baby or like moving away or embarking on a big life stage, because as a Scorpio, it's a real betrayal.
Yeah.
So I have some faces that I keep in the back pocket that I've practiced for this, which is, you know, that's amazing. I'm so happy for you. And then on the inside, the black hole of my heart is just kind of like experiencing a gravitational pull.
Right.
So this is what happens to me. And I think what I found, or what I've been really struggling with for probably since the pandemic really is, and I should say since 2020, obviously the pandemic is still continuing, but since that lockdown period, is this idea of life stages and watching the people around me kind of move through these big life stages. During lockdowns, you know, in Melbourne, we had the longest lockdowns in the world. And so people that I knew used that time to have a baby.
Yeah.
Which is...
It's sourdough or baby.
Yeah, it was great. I went the sourdough route, not the baby one. So they've had babies, or they might have like moved countries. So the ones that haven't had babies have like made a big, you know, leap to kind of, you know, really intentionally do something with forward momentum, and they've moved away. And so I have really experienced over the last 4 years a sense of loss. I'm not saying that I'm not friends with any of these people that have moved or had children anymore. That's not the case. But there is a sense of, you know, distance now where they're in a bit of a different either life stage or place, and the friendships that once looked one way now look a different way. And so obviously this was devastating to me, and I started to wonder like how I could kind of sit with this, because there's no similarity with where I am in my life stage. I feel like I'm sort of stuck in the same place, like in the same city. As I spoke about online, and, you know, I froze my eggs last year, which is in a sense a way to prolong or put off any kind of, you know, baby making life stage. And at the same time, great, I've managed to, and, you know, luckily through having the access to services that I do and those privileges, I've managed to buy myself a little bit of time. Now what's a crushing weight is that I don't think I'm doing anything useful with that time that I managed to buy.
But like, do you need to though?
Well, that's exactly what brings me to what I want to talk to you about today. Because as it turns out, queer people experience time itself differently.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Like, yeah.
So there's actually a whole concept in queer philosophy called queer temporality, which says that the way that we as queer and trans people experience the passing of time is actually completely different to how cis hetero people experience the passing of time.
Yeah.
So when I looked into this, I found just so much to reframe how I was looking at my life and time. But first I want to check in with you. Like, in terms of life stage, is the hard time that I'm having remotely relatable to you at all? Or are you just like, you loser with your internalized heteronormativity?
No. I definitely don't think I have internalized heteronormativity. Wow, that's really actually hard to say. Am I having a hard time with my life stage as it currently stands? I would say yes, but I think for different reasons. Like, I think the 6-year, I was going to say time difference between us, but I guess it is.
The time difference.
We're in different time zones. I think we're both going through a significant period of our lives, but I think they are different. Like, you're talking about babies and like people moving away and kind of solidifying their family units and things like that. What I'm going through is I'm one of my only friends who is in a career plus one that they love and it's like their life, and B, in a long-term relationship. And so the rest of my friends are like either finishing up studying, starting studying, in casual jobs, unemployed. Like, it's like for a lot of them, it really sucks. And like they're just having to like trudge through a really awful time. And then I'm kind of here like having my own sucky parts, but like for the most part, like I'm kind of just chilling. So it's odd for me because it's like I am at the stage where I'm kind of like, oh, like do I want to get married? Do I want to like, you know, like solidify my family unit in a different way? Like, do I want to get another cat? Like, do I want to like?
So you're kind of at that. You're kind of ahead. You know, you're at the. You're kind of a step further ahead in the like accepted timeline.
Well, yeah. If it was a linear timeline and I was putting my queer one over like a heteronormative one, it would kind of be a little bit similar. But it's like I can't really relate to my friends. Like I can't really talk about work. Like yes, like it's got that extra layer of hardness because like I'm quote unquote an influencer or like whatever, like I'm a creator, I'm a creative, whatever. That's like one level of like like relatability that isn't there, but like underneath that, the fact that I have a career, quote unquote,
You've found a niche.
Yeah, and it's unrelatable to them because they're like hate their jobs, they left their jobs. Like, do you know what I mean? So then it's like I don't know.
I mean, it's the same thing. It's kind of dealing with I guess our relationship with a timeline. And what I'm really happy about is that we can bookmark this episode in 6 years' time. You can listen to it.
Oh,
and this
no.
is going to be therapy for you when you hit my life stage.
No.
No, but it sounds like, you know, you're a lot more open to those kind of things, whereas I'm kind of just like white knuckling through the experience of entropy.
Well, yeah. But like, do you feel like your time is like, you're trying to pause time, aren't you?
I'm trying to stop time, or I'm sort of really struggling with the idea of like, am I doing enough with the time that I have? And I think this is, again, pressures that come from the outside that I'm struggling with.
Yeah, I don't have that, nah.
Yeah, okay, so I love that for you.
I'm sorry.
So it's something that I've been, you know, dealing with since about 2020 because, you know, I actually moved to New York in 2020. I moved on March 8 in 2020, packed up my life, apartment, everything, and we moved to New York only to go sort of headfirst into the COVID pandemic kickoff that happened there. I was in the middle of you know, Queens and Brooklyn at the time, which was really the epicenter. And then I came back and, you know, had to sort of rebuild everything from scratch. So I think, you know, that was the beginning of something that I've been struggling with. And at the moment, at that time, I didn't really have the language for it. But I was reading this book, you know, in 2022, I think. It was called Detransition Baby by Tori Peters. I don't know if you've seen it on the shelves.
I've probably seen it on the shelves at your house, but
oh yeah, at my house. I love it. I said, have you seen it on the shelves?
I just assumed you meant your house.
Yes. I love that you've got like a catalog of all the books that I own in my house. I meant general shelves.
I don't think I have.
But it's a fiction book, but essentially it is the story of a trans woman who always wanted to be a mother and, you know, is then hit up by her ex who she dated as a trans woman who's now detransitioned, is identifying as a man and is in another relationship, a heterosexual relationship. And he sort of proposes that his ex, the protagonist, his new partner and him raise a child as a triad. And it you know, it's a really great book that looks at gender and how it changes and our identities in relation to things like motherhood. And it's really funny. You know, I made it sound really serious. It's a really fun book.
Okay, cool.
And so in this book, I was first introduced to a word called queer temporality.
Yeah, okay. You have said that word to me so many times over the years.
I know. I think I whisper it to myself when I'm in a panic attack. I'm just like, queer temporality. I'm okay. So what that means is, you know, just in terms of shorthand, essentially queer time. And that's that idea that queer and trans people experience time differently.
I was going to make a Doctor Who joke, but I couldn't get there in time.
You definitely can. And I won't be able to laugh at it because I've not seen Doctor Who, but I'm sure...
Well, Doctor Who just now makes so much sense.
There we go. Yeah, that's it. So where this idea or concept came from was in the 2000s. There is a Columbia Uni academic, queer philosopher and trans man, Jack Halberstam. He really wrote a lot about the idea of queer temporality. He wasn't the only one that was shaping this idea, but he wrote some of the most well-known pieces on it. And I'm going to stop and say, like, what is temporality? Because that is a word that, you know, isn't in the day-to-day lexicon of most of us. But the word temporality means the state of existing within or having some relationship with time.
Yeah.
You know, this idea of time being you know, a construct. And I guess temporality can be seen as what you might call lived time as opposed to objective time, which is clock time.
Yeah, well, there's like temporal.
Temporal,
like
yeah. How we
how
we subjectively experience time versus what a clock might be telling us.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is that's kind of what we're talking about when we hear the word temporality. You know how when you're a kid and your birthday feels just so far away all the time? Or Christmas or whatever your favorite day of the year is, Halloween, like it just feels like it's stretching so far into the distance.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like since, you know, you're a kid, recently that it seems to come along a lot quicker each year.
Does it?
I mean, I feel like it does. I feel like it's like always my birthday.
Really?
Or, you know, the end of the year, like I think as you get older, you start hearing people say things like, God, is it May already?
Oh, yeah.
You know, and that's like a small talk conversation, but that is because when you're, say, 4 years old, the idea of having Christmas or whatever holiday you get really jazzed about when you're a kid, you know, if it's once a year, it always just feels so far away because when you're 4, that year is literally a quarter of your life.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you get older, that portion, that year represents a smaller percentage of your life year on year. So it can give us the feeling that time is speeding up.
Can I also add to that? Wait, is that argument like, not that you're like arguing anything, but like, is that just like the close of that argument? Because if you've got something to add, like I want to hear it before I add.
Well, the only thing I was going to add before I get into the next is that as there's more happening in the world, that can also make us feel like life is going at warp speed because there is more information or there is more kind of sensory input as well.
Yeah, because I was going to say it's similar to that. I do feel like it is, you're so right when you say like, you know, when you're 4, like your birthday, that's like a quarter of your life. Like, but I do think that like as you get older, like yes, things pile on, that we kind of don't use birthdays and holidays as like such strong tentpole like goals or milestones in like the passage of time. So I feel like whenever I felt like things are getting super hectic, and I don't remember if I like got taught this in therapy, but like to actually like stop looking at the day to day and actually flip it and do look at something that's far away, because that'll like stretch time out for you again, which I do like as like a coping technique.
Wait, so how far ahead are you looking to kind of stretch time out?
So well, it depends. I don't really go, I'm like 10 out of 10, like mentally unwell right now. I'll look to like Christmas in 5 years. Like I don't do it that way.
Imagine if mental illness was so easily solved just doing that.
No, but like for example, like right now, or like something I forcibly make these kind of like milestones in the future so that I have something to like work towards that like is like tangible, because I feel like that's the thing, like time doesn't feel, you can't comprehend the concept of the passage of time unless it's a tangible experience, which is why I like holidays and I like looking forward to things in the future, because it gives you a like sense of tangibility to the passage of time, because you meet that event, you experience that event, you're present for that event, and then you go, oh, it's done, and then you like move on.
Yeah, it's like a marker. I think I totally get that, and I think that's essentially what we're looking at here. So this idea that time is subjective as we experience it. So there are a few things here, and this is where it gets a little deeper. One of the ideas that Jack Halberstam came up with was or wrote about is the idea that as queer people or as trans people, we only know we were queer kids looking back. So unable to experience our queerness or transness at the time. So often an experience that we have is, I was a queer kid, or I was so clearly, trans, or, as a child. But we can look to these things that played out, that was an authentic representation of who I am, or that behavior makes sense in the context of who I am now.
Yeah.
But at the time, we weren't experiencing it that way unless we were one of those people that absolutely knew what, you know, what they were, how they would identify.
Yeah.
So, you know, when I look back and I think, oh my gosh, I was doing all these things as a kid, that makes so much sense now. What it can kind of do is rob you of the present that you might have had then. It's like we had a ghost childhood in a sense.
I didn't have that with being queer because I knew that I was queer and something was going on when I was like 10 or 11 and like I came out at like.
But what about
11 and a
before
half.
then?
Before then, I don't really think that I was paying attention to that part of my identity. What I would say though is that I have experienced this exact same thing, but with being autistic and neurodivergent, because I went through an incredible sense of grief when I moved past the denial stage of like being diagnosed as autistic. And I did feel like that period of time pre-11 where I was more focused and I was suffering bullying because of like being autistic, that I did feel robbed. But you know what I mean?
I do. I 100%. Yeah, I know what you mean. And I experience definitely that part as well. I look back now and I'm like, every other child had a favorite toy that was a toy, and I only had a giant industrial chain and padlock as a toy.
Yeah.
And that sucked because if people had known that I needed that at the time, maybe I would have been allowed to take it to kindergarten.
Yeah. But I guess I say that because it's like I really wasn't paying attention to my queerness from like a pre-11.
Yeah.
Where I was post-11. So I actually have no, like, I don't have any memories of quote unquote being queer or not queer in the stereotypical sense.
Interesting.
I wasn't paying attention to that because like that wasn't a big deal for the outside world. So I wasn't paying attention to it.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. So, I mean, there's this idea like, you know, looking back and a sense of a ghost childhood, which is what some of these academics have framed it. And I'd be really interested to know if that is something that resonates with you. Please let us know, because I think it's a really interesting idea that I would love to see fleshed out with some more lived experiences. But I guess, you know, what we're talking about is like tree falling in the woods. Were you really queer if you didn't know it? That type of kind of, you know, ideas and philosophy. But I want to move now to another element of it, which is called Futurity.
Sounds like a hip hop album.
I mean, I don't hate it.
I don't hate it either. Like it's kind of like a good brand name. So like TM. Like don't take it.
Futurity.
Sounds, what is it now? You say it like it's a sorority.
Oh my God.
Like I'm like Alpha Beta Futurity.
Alpha Beta Futurity.
Class of 2027.
Futurity.
What?
That I was just making it like I was just giving it the rage treatment.
Oh, I thought you were doing like a 100-year-old spring water Futurity.
Like, I don't hate that either. Here's a word. Here's a word that we don't hate, and you can have it. A baby
name that we love but won't be using.
Yeah, totally. So essentially, Futurity, it talks about the idea of the future and our relationship with the future in itself. So time is distorted when you have an uncertain future. And I want to do like I want to give a heads up that I'm going to talk a little bit now about the idea that, you know, trans women have, you know, a less certain future. So I do want to give you a heads up that if that is something that is really not what you need to be listening to or talking about right now,
turn us off.
Just turn us off or like skip 15 minutes into the episode and we'll leave it there. However, there's this idea that, for example, trans women on average don't live as long as cisgender or heterosexual people. And then when you start to look at like trans women of color versus, you know, their white counterparts, that gap is wider even still. And so what's interesting here though is trans women often don't get to bank on having children because often they're not living their life thinking that that's a milestone on the horizon because they have socialized, they've been socialized to see a less certain future for themselves. Now, that is a gross generalization and I am not a trans woman. So again, please help me pad this out with some lived experiences. But what these academics were saying is when we look at things like futurity, we don't think of them as for example, a reproductive health issue.
Yeah.
So when we look at like, you know, women's health, quote unquote, or reproductive health issues, we sort of look at sort of a very biological set of, you know, concerns, when actually what we can be looking at is things like, you know, how certain is your future? And then where does reproducing fit within a protracted lifespan?
Yeah.
So it's just I just thought that was a really interesting way of looking at, you know, again, some of the innate transphobia in the medical system.
Well, that's really interesting because when I first went on testosterone, I did the informed consent model, which is where they like basically just give you like the side effects, like of the medication, and just get you to read that and then like sign off on it to like, yeah, that's basically an informed consent model. But the doctor, like if you've got a good doctor, which I do, like, you know, we'll go through like, you know, how do you feel about these, like, you know, and one of the side effects is obviously, you know, if you go on testosterone, your chances of conceiving is like quite low. It's not impossible. Like I definitely know, you know, I'm in like this trans birthing group on Facebook for some reason, just because I was curious, and like heaps of people who are on like testosterone have, you know, successfully conceived. But I digress. One of the things my doctor did talk about was, hey, just so you know, like this is a possibility that you won't be able to conceive even if you come off the medication. How do you feel about that? Like, what do you want to do in your life? And that was one of the questions I got asked. And I was like, that's actually pretty sick. I mean, I was like 20 or something at the time, but I was like, that's a nice thought-provoking question, because, you know, if you feel safe in the environment to talk with that doctor, you do have the opportunity to go like, oh, actually, I don't know. And then, you know, one of the things that they do offer you is to like give you a mental health plan, just in case that you want to go to like therapy and chat it, or counseling and chat it out with someone to figure out like,
interesting,
you're like essentially like a little bit of a life plan, so that you can kind of make a more informed decision. So
but I think, I mean, what that is exactly right. It's the idea of a life plan,
yeah,
and who is born into having one, and who either has to create one or through a lack of certain future feels like they're not entitled to one, or there's no point. And I want to dovetail into, because again, I think this is really interesting in the way that we look at healthcare and the barriers to, I guess, life, accessing the best possible life, accessing the ability to thrive for queer and trans people. But, you know, I want to take a little step back into the 80s.
Okay.
So, you know, my special interest has always been the HIV/AIDS crisis.
Yeah.
I want to talk about something called queer viral time, because before the academics in the 2000s started talking about, I guess, queer temporality in general, there was an idea in the sort of 80s and 90s of queer viral time. And so this, you know, a lot of queer temporality took its cues from observing the aftermath and the experiences of people living through the HIV/AIDS crisis. But at that time, there was a sense that gay men and bisexual men, or men who have sex with men, experienced a compressed version of time.
Yeah.
So there was this sense of, for many of them, life began a little later when they were able to like enter the gay scene, and then they had this experience with this virus, which at that time was completely new. It was terrifying. It really was this idea that there was a death sentence that could come for you at any moment, and you didn't really know how it was being transmitted or if there would ever be a cure. And you, of course, had the mainstream media strongly implying that it was affecting you and your friends because of your sexuality, not in like not in a practical sense of how it was spreading, but because you were sinful in some way.
Yeah, like a cultural thing.
Yeah, like a cultural thing. And so what that did is it meant a generation had a compressed experience of time. And so they really had to get used to the idea of living a life in a shorter period of time, and what that does to certain milestones. And I know, while, you know, this would be a tangent, but for those men, and of course, you know, many other people that experienced an HIV diagnosis, when antiretroviral drugs became accessible and more effective, and we got into the idea of being, undetected, then they experienced the opposite, kind of like what you said of having something to look forward to in the future. Their idea of time then was quite jarring because it just shot out ahead of them in stark contrast to what they had accepted.
Yeah.
So how do you live an entire life in less time without the milestones that we've been socialized to use to mark time?
I assume your philosophy on life turns a little bit more hedonistic because you're just like, I don't know, man. Why should I be taking this super seriously if I don't know what's around the corner?
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think what we can see about this idea of compressed time and what it does do is we're talking very much about the experiences of queer and trans people, but the same concept applies to people that have, lived through war or lived through, genocide, who have lived through in places and times, have been refugees where they have had an uncertain future. So that same concept does apply.
Yeah.
So what are these milestones? What's interesting is we've talked a little bit, I think in recent episodes, about heteronormativity a little bit. Lol, that's literally all we talk about. There is such a thing as heterochronology.
Is that the chronological experience of heteronormativity through the lens of time?
It's time is heteronormative.
Yeah. This can all be reduced back to quantum physics.
Yes, and the patriarchy.
Yeah, but yes, because time is heteronormative because the linear measure of time is based on the because it's the space-time. That's how you measure time, through space. And if the space you're moving through is heteronormative, then of course time will inherently be heteronormative.
Well, if we look at these milestone markers, Jack Halberstam, our philosopher and a trans academic, said that these milestones were, and this isn't very sexy, marriage, reproduction, maturation, and inheritance.
That sounds boring as fuck.
I know, that's a life. That's your heterochronology.
What happened to the sourdough phase, the crochet phase, the racquetball phase, the dating a punk band member phase? Yeah,
there's no phases or fixations in heterochronology.
Wow, that's kind of, listen, if you're a box ticker and that's what you enjoy doing, tick those boxes, baby. You go for it.
I know. I have to say that we should make up a queer chronology that incorporates all those different phases.
Like a bingo card.
Yeah, I know. I want to go back into my surfing phase.
You had a surfing phase?
I did. I had a surfing phase.
All right.
But that ended with a mild concussion.
Oh.
So with these things, marriage, reproduction, maturation, and inheritance, marriage, for most of history, that's been inaccessible to, same-sex attracted people. Reproduction, again, something that is typically inaccessible to same-sex couples. Obviously, there are scientific technologies and interventions now that can help. I've frozen my eggs and, you can do all sorts of things with IVF, but they are, relatively speaking, pretty inaccessible. Maturation. So, we're working, we are retiring, we are accessing things like superannuation, and then
going on a cruise.
So cruises are really important to heterochronology, and then inheritance. So again, we've had those children in the reproduction phase. We now get to give them some generational wealth off the back of it, and then the cycle continues. And again,
that's a very white lens as well.
It is, absolutely. When we look at kind of, this generational wealth, it all works as long as you fit into that mold. And I think, when we look at access to jobs that queer and trans people don't have the same privilege in, well then, are we able to access things like enough wealth to provide an inheritance and superannuation and things like that. So with these things off the table, broadly speaking, or inaccessible, we've had to create our own relationship to time. So I'm going to talk about this in the context of queer time is a broad umbrella term that really discusses the whole, the myriad ways that queer people can deviate from sort of timelines that have been established for us. And these timelines have been established within heteronormative and cisnormative systems, oppressive systems. So I want to also break this down now because there are slightly different experiences for people who are queer and people who are trans. Of course, a lot of people are both, so dealing with both of them. So often queer and trans people will be criticized for being immature.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
Yeah, all the time.
So I wonder, and I still get this little voice in my ear that's like, should I dress in a different, more grown-up way?
I feel like this is one of your core insecurities, that people think that you're immature or you yourself are immature, and it's like a fear of yours.
I think I definitely flip-flop between am I too immature to am I too old?
Yeah, but I think they're different things, because you're equating being old to being boring, because I think when we think of immature, we think of fun.
Okay.
At least in my mind. And that's maybe not how you're consciously thinking about it, but I definitely think that's how it kind of comes out behaviorally.
Because when you see a bunch of people kind of hit 30, they do start dressing differently, or you can get a sense. Sometimes I just notice in the back of my mind, I'm like, can I wear this? And the answer is a resounding yes, obviously. I'm not going to listen to that silly little voice in my head. I've got too many of them to deal with on a day-to-day anyway. But I think there is this idea of, you know, when we look at how queer people often like to dress and how out of sync that can be with what's considered dressing appropriately for your age, that's interesting. And it's often based on heteronormative life stages. So if you're in your 30s, according to heteronormative rhetoric, you would have children by now.
Yeah.
So what we're really asking, is it appropriate for a mother to dress that way, or a father to dress that way?
Okay. Now this is getting interesting. So do you think I don't know how to really frame this question, but like when you do have that voice in your head being like, should you really be wearing that? Is that coming from like you think on some level you can only be taken seriously if people view you as like a parental figure? I
think if not parental, then tied to some other important kind of accepted life stage. So something that, you know, are you dress, you know, if you're not dressing as a mother, are you dressing professionally for an office environment type thing? So
okay. So it's like if you look like a parental figure or a professional, people are going to semiotically understand that you have quote unquote, gone through certain experiences and therefore have a level of wisdom.
I think so. And then you could also look at, you know, I've seen heaps of memes be like 32 in the city is 22, 32 in the suburbs is 42. And I think there is some truth to that, in that you start to see people's sense of dress change often as you go into areas where there are more families or things like that, because, you know, you start to hear people sort of talk about what they should be wearing, or, you know, I can't wear that anymore. And I think that's interesting. And then I think within older queer people, they're often criticized for like going clubbing.
Yeah.
It's not abnormal in a queer club to see people in their 50s, 60s,
70s,
along with people that have just turned 18, all in the one space.
Yeah.
And often engaging in relationships with each other.
Yeah. Yeah, that is true. It is true. It's so weird. You can't win, can you? One minute you're not old enough and the next minute you're too old and you're like, well, fuck me, I guess.
Literally. And so you're like, fuck me, I guess. And that's where we get these great age gap relationships in the queer community. But I guess again, looking at those, you know, when we do not have reproductive expectations put upon us, we can seek relationships with bigger age gaps. Or, you know, when you look at kind of like, I don't know, Sarah Paulson and Holland Taylor, people like that, it's like, it's amazing how we can access just so many different people and have so many different connections when we're able to live outside these reproductive milestones that are placed upon us.
Yeah, that is so true.
I'm interested in this one. So when people who come out as queer later, I think this is why I always have empathy. And we spoke about this on our Jojo Siwa detention episode, but I always have so much empathy when people that come out as queer later in life are really annoying.
Yeah, you love the cringe.
Yeah, I love the cringe. I mean, obviously find it annoying, but I think I have empathy because this idea that we often go through a second or a delayed teenage phase where we become really obnoxious and we're dating a lot of different people or having crushes or having this drama that people that I don't know, in hetero relationships or married might see as immature or grow up or snap out of it type. But actually our lives started later than theirs.
Yeah.
And so this is, you know, because of heteronormity, it's caused a delay. And so we then can access those giddy feelings, those crushes, all that stuff that's really permissible when you're 14, we are navigating 20, 30, 40.
Yeah, that is so true because I don't know whether I became like more obnoxious or cringe when I came out as trans, like for the second time, I guess, in my 20s. But like I did feel like I think about myself as like pre-coming out and I was so old. Like at 19 and 18, I was so old. I was like, and no hate to him, like shout out to the ex-boyfriend, but like I was like so fucking boring and like I was in this relationship and I was like, oh, I'm gonna get married at 24 and have kids and like I love that for me. And I really thought that I wanted that at that age, but I did feel really fucking old for some reason. And then when I came out as trans, I did feel like a baby and like I had no clue what I was doing. Maybe I was obnoxious and cringe. I don't know. No one's ever told me that. So maybe I need to do a bit of a survey. But I do feel like I became more youthful. Like I do feel like I got life breathed back into me.
That's really interesting. And also I'm so happy that happened.
Did that not happen to you? I guess you came out, I don't know when. I
think I was experiencing queerness at 14, 15, 16. So it was pretty on par with, I wasn't able to be open about it, but was I able to cry in my room and write like really cringe poetry about girls and listen to Tegan and Sarah? Yes. So I got that.
So I did that though at 16, 17. And then I got into this relationship with this guy, like, and this is where I will lay the hate. Sorry, but I have to. I was like, oh, I think I'm non-binary. And he was like, I don't think that's a thing. And I was like, oh, I guess I believe you. And then I just was like, do you know what I mean? And then I flipped right. I went to the other end of the scale and I was like super like, I'm like a woman. I don't even know where I happened there.
I'm a woman, hear me roar.
I'm a woman, hear me roar. Yeah. So, and then like I feel, I don't know. That is strange though because like that period of my life exists outside of my experiential timeline. So that I feel like is interesting and maybe other people have had those like periods in their life that just like feel outside of like their accepted
main story,
reality.
Like they're a side quest.
Yeah,
a
it's
little
like
side quest
my
moment.
little alternate reality moment there. I just hopped universes for a second.
Yeah, totally. And I think that, you know, I guess I do feel a bit of that now when I listen to music. So when I listen to, when I'm listening to Good Luck Babe by Chapel Roan, that absolutely hits me hard because there are so many experiences that would have paired perfectly with that song if people like Chapel Roan were able to have a platform in the music industry at that time. Like when I listen to Good Luck Babe, I become like euphoric and devastated and furious all at the same time because I'm like, oh, I missed out on that. Or if I listen to kind of the music that King Princess is sort of doing or Girl in Red, I think that would have been actually we have a playlist at our house called like gay songs we wish we had.
Really?
Yeah, like I think
God.
that there is a bit of that. But I also want to ask about your experience transitioning because for trans people there's also second puberty. So I wonder, a lot of people have sort of mentioned that makes you feel like a teenager, this kind of thing you're kind of re-experiencing. Did you experience kind of like a second teenagehood when you were kind of transitioning?
I think my mum would say I did. She definitely has said back when I was like kind of like soundboarding off her, like the changes I was having, she definitely said that I kind of came across more teenagery. But I don't know whether that's because my personality and my livelihood was kind of coming back. But like second puberty, I guess so in a way. Like I did experience like physical symptoms, but for me, like I've been sick my whole life. So I've had physical symptoms and experiences that I've just lived with my whole life. And so to have another set of physical symptoms, it didn't really register on the same level in the same space as I think maybe like a healthy person would have.
Yeah, so you were just kind of like,
I'm sweating a lot. Oh well, you know what I mean?
It could be anything.
Yeah.
It's just another thing my body's doing.
Yeah, and
okay.
I think as well, like and I'm going to talk about it because there should be no shame, but like I got my period when I was like 11, and I was like a very athletic, very stocky kid. So I was kind of like physicalized very young because of sport, and I guess naturally anyway. And I experienced that kind of like pubescent, experience of getting my period really young. So I'd gone through that more than 10 years before even starting testosterone. So the fact that I have had random physical symptoms, plus I like started, I guess, puberty on the earlier age bracket, like coming in like hot with the HRT at 21 really wasn't phasing me. And I didn't really think about it as like a second coming, you know?
Yeah, a second. Yeah. Cause I mean, I do know people, and I think what's great now, or not great, bare minimum, where being able to access, trans healthcare is that, it doesn't have to feel like it can be graduated, and it can be, given to you based on your own personal body. Whereas in places where that's not possible and you're accessing HRT off the black market, it can, and I knew people that were in this situation before it was more widely available in Australia. When you're going through puberty, and you're having all those experiences, and I'm talking less physically, I'm talking, I guess, emotionally, or, when you get an influx of hormones, and, if you're taking testosterone, it might be kind of like increased feelings of anger, or like arousal, or things like that. And then, if you're on estrogen, increased feelings of just being really moody or sensitive, all of those things that can make us feel young again until we mature into them. And then by that point, we could be at a much later stage in our life, but our life is just beginning on our terms.
Yeah, I do feel like I'm at that point now. Like I do feel like, there is an adjustment, like an emotional adjustment period. I think like hormones just affect everything in your body. So it's like, they're going to affect like the emotive output that you have to certain things, the response. So like, I definitely feel like now that you've put it that way, like talking about emotions, I've gone through some that kind of transition where I'm like kind of know what the vibe is now, but it's like, it's kind of weird because I feel like my 15-year-old self, like mentally and like responsive, like the responses I have to things.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I guess in that way, like I am kind of, but then it's like the argument of like, are you return because you're your true self, or the self that you are in your own mind now, are you returning to a more like true version of like a younger self? Or is it just like, why do we like, that's, I don't know, more of like a philosophical question.
Well, I think that's where we can go back to old mate Jack Halberstam.
What does he say about
Well,
this?
I don't know.
Oh, we should email him. Maybe I'll just chuck him a question.
Yeah, maybe we'll email him. But that's the theory. I'm going to sneeze.
Bless you.
Hang on. It's gone.
Okay.
But it might come back at any moment. So I think
what a surprise.
What like this all means is for queer and trans people, life often begins at 18, 19, our 20s, or even 30s, even later. And on top of that, statistically, we often live longer through things like access to healthcare, sort of those socioeconomical reasons, mental health, and violence. So, when we balance that, we are a culture of people that through lack of access to these heterochronological milestones, we experience a version of time that is compressed, and we have no choice but to make the most of our life within this period of time without any of those milestone markers. So we don't have a roadmap. But what I came to at the end of this based on the hard time that I'm going through, which is like, you know, not like that hard in the scheme of things, but maybe there is a freedom in like stepping outside of this timeline, trying to find some new milestones to shoot for. And so maybe learning a little bit from you in terms of what can I look forward to in the future that will stretch time out? What can I do in the present to make meaning out of whatever it is I am doing at the time? Much as I can, squash that little voice in my head that's saying like you're too old or too young or you shouldn't wear that or this, that, and the other, and try and navigate time as best as possible with what I have access to at the moment. Now, I don't think that's going to be easy because obviously my brain is stacked against me a lot of the time. Yeah. But I'm going to try and think of this. And so that is probably why whenever I've had that look of existential angst on my face and you've heard me whisper to myself, queer temporality, queer temporality, queer temporality. Now you know what's going on. And maybe I could share that if you're in a similar situation, one, please reach out so I'm not alone. And two, just say queer temporality 3 times in the mirror and everything will get much better.
A version of the Doctor will appear and take you in the TARDIS. That's how the new companions are chosen.
And say, you look great in that outfit and you're doing just fine.
Tan France comes out.
That's the dream. Yeah, Tan France will come out. If you say queer temporality 3 times in the mirror, Tan France will come out of the mirror and tell you that you're doing just fine, sweetie.
Yeah. Listen, it's tough. It's tough. Like, I totally get it. And it really sucks because it's like there's only so many times that you can tell yourself like Christmas is around the corner. Okay.
Why does that make me want to cry?
I know. It's really upsetting. Well, it's because it's like you just want to be held like a little baby.
Oh, isn't that all we want to do is just be held like a little baby?
Yeah.
Anyway, that's it for the ep. So you can, like we said up the top, it would mean a lot to us if you would hit follow on the podcast so that we can make it as successful as possible. That's a small gift that would help me with my life right now.
Yeah.
Now that was just me, emotionally manipulating you. You absolutely don't have to do that, but we'd like it.
Yeah. And on top of that, this isn't, I'm diverting from your emotional manipulation of our audience.
Probably good.
But I just want to say, if you have listened this far through, thank you. You're one of a kind. You're very special because to listen to us for this long, you must have a very good listening brain or just enjoy us. But either way, I'm sure you would also enjoy joining our Discord that we have. There's a link in the show notes, which is just essentially the episode description on whatever you are listening to us on. But we've got a Discord. We also have a Patreon, which people think is just like completely a paid platform, which for the most part it is. However, we have a free tier, which means that if you sign up to the free tier, you do get a portion of the paid posts per month for free, as well as some other things. So that's something that you can join us and tag along with as well. And then also, if you have listened this far through, we want to let you know a little secret. We've been working on a newsletter for you to enjoy. We're not sure how that's going to kind of look yet, and we're not sure how we're going to get it to you, but it is in the making, and that's going to have lots of different things, not just info about us, but info about random stuff that's happening in the world and a bit of like a information hub, something little tasty snack in your inbox. So keep an eye out for that. But otherwise, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. We've really had such a good time getting this podcast off the ground over the last few months, and it means so much to us. Every time someone says like, I love the podcast, I listen to it at work, like, I don't know, it's just like my favorite thing ever. Like, I just love it when people say like, oh, I was like driving to work and I was listening to you, because it's like, I listen to podcasts when I drive to work and now someone's listening to me. Like, oh, like.
That's so, I agree. So please keep in touch if you want to do that. Find us on all social media platforms, pretty much. Rainbow History Class is the handle. And if we can leave you how we do every episode with a philosophical concept to keep in mind, and that is that not everything is gay, but there is gay in everything, including time itself.